Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I know it's been a long day. I don't know about any of you, but when he started to almost get into that bath and started talking about his heart rate going up, I think my heart rate was going up worse than his. I just peeked back there. Those 4 guys that wheeled the bathtub off, they're all in it right now. Yeah. Okay, one thing I want to do before I get started, I run events not like this, but not too dissimilar, and I just want to say, I think you guys, the organizing team, has done so far just an exceptional job. So can everyone give them a round of applause? These events are really a long, long slog to put together at this level, and so thank you. You guys have done amazing. So my story is going to be a little bit warmer. That looks not like words. That's okay. It says, hello, Riga, I'm Steve. Ricefield, nomads, and Pilmeni. You may be wondering what Pilmeni has to do with nomads and rice fields. The answer is nothing, really. I'm probably going to talk about rice fields. I'm going to talk about nomads. And I'm going to think about Pilmeni, because I've been to Riga twice, and really that's what I remember. I think you do have the best Pilmeni in the world. That was a big part of me wanting to come back here today. I'm about 4 months into my third life, if I can think about it in sections. I moved to London about 4 months ago. I've been living in Bali for the last 9 years, and that's really what I'm going to talk about mostly. But it all started in life 1. So my first 10 years of, I guess, of work life was working with the UN. It didn't always look like this, but I started out as a very kind of young idealist, I think as many people do who start with the UN in the first place. We have this very simple desire to change the world, or to save the world, actually, if I could be so obnoxious, but that's kind of what you feel like when you're 20 or 21. We're going to go out here and we're going to do good. And in a lot of ways, my career went very well. So I climbed fairly quickly. I specialized in an area called crisis prevention and recovery. If anybody wants some career advice, don't specialize in crisis prevention and recovery. If you want to have a family and keep them, it tended to take us to places like Cambodia and Sudan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Libya, and doing things like clearing landmines, resettling IDPs, and reintegrating soldiers after conflict. So on the surface, it was a very, how would I say, a very satisfying career. I got paid well, I got a good pension, I got good child benefits, and everything seemed to be on the right track. And so when I was about 31, 32, a couple months before what I call my early onset midlife crisis, and kind of the death of Steve 1, I got offered a job within the UN, and it was a better job than I had. It was a good career move. I had this kind of vision in my head that I wanted to be a country director by the age of 38. Don't know why 38, but that was kind of the task I had set for myself. I was 32 at the time. And that was what I was working towards. Now, I had a really interesting job. I got offered what really was going to be probably a very boring, soul-sucking, very bureaucratic job. But I decided to say yes, because I thought this was the right decision to do to kind of meet my target of being the country director. As I've learned along the way, there we go. I don't know why my screens are showing like this. I don't know if there's anything to do about that, because I do have text. But this says, a single thought can change everything. So the thought that crept into my mind kind of at the 11th hour before I took this job was, every country director I know has a life that I don't think I want. A lot of divorce, a lot of substance abuse or kind of self-soothing behaviors in other ways. The jobs I actually did weren't necessarily that interesting. I knew at some level it was more of an ego thing than anything else. And that one thought more or less ruined my career. 3 months after having that thought, instead of taking the job, I quit. We had that existential crisis that every nomadic couple has when you all of a sudden don't have a job to take you from one place to the next. And the question was, where would we live? Would we go back to Canada, or would we, for no good reason, move to Bali? I moved to Bali. I took this picture a week after arriving, and this was almost 10 years ago now, and I still can't remember if it was like this triumphant shout of glee that I had escaped the Matrix, and all of you suckers, were out there slogging along while I was on a beach, or if it was like this kind of terrified, childish yelp that I had just blown up my life, which I really had, without a plan B. I think it was probably a bit of both. But part of the reason why we chose Bali was to send our kids here. This is called the Green School. It's an 8-hectare permaculture campus. It's all made out of bamboo and recycled materials. It's a very progressive, globally oriented, environmentally focused curriculum. It was a little bit of our dream school. So we said we'd go to Bali, we'd take a year off, we'd come here, we'd put our kids in here. And the kind of joy for us was I ended up meeting a bunch of people that were just like me. And by just like me, I meant kind of mid-career professionals, people that were coming from different backgrounds, but had all done things where they were, quote-unquote, successful, but they had all come to Bali at this transitional moment in their life where they knew something was either wrong or missing with what they were doing, and they didn't necessarily know what it was, and they had made that decision, and this kind of theme about choice and making a decision has come up a lot today. They'd made a decision to give themselves a bit of space to figure out what that would look like. It was probably the most creative and talented group of unemployed people I'd ever met. I mean, really, it was from media, from the corporate, from professional sports people, UN aid workers, and everything in between. So after spending some time kind of hearing the same story again and again of, I'm looking for something to do next, and I don't know what that is, we basically opened a clubhouse for those people. That's what we thought at the time. So I opened a co-working space in Bali in 2013. It's called HUBUD, or a hub in Ubud. Ubud is the name of the town. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Bali. And we did so against, I guess, a lot of advice from people and a lot of resistance. People didn't really get what co-working is. Has anybody ever, do you know what co-working is? If you've been to a co-working or heard the term, can you just put your hand up just so I have an idea? Yeah, okay, so most people have. I'll refer to it a little bit later. But in 2012, when we were starting to talk about this, really people hadn't heard about it. There was none in the country of Indonesia, very few in Asia, and certainly none in a place like Bali. So the ones that did exist were in Singapore and Hong Kong, in urban centers and financial centers. And everybody said, well, nobody's going to come to Bali to work. People come to Bali to get married. People come to Bali to get divorced. But nobody comes to Bali to work. And my question was, well, if they could, why wouldn't you come to Bali to work? So we opened it for this kind of eclectic group of transitional parents, basically. And all of a sudden, these digital nomads came. So over the last 5.5 years, we've had nearly 9,000 now members. We have this kind of incredible pass-through of people. We sign up around 100 new members every month. And they literally come from actually probably more than 80 countries now. Oh, look at that. So just a quick couple of pictures. People often ask me what it looks like. It's bamboo. We're into that. The basic design idea was if people are coming from Riga or London or Singapore or Sydney, let's not recreate a space that they could have found in Riga, London, Singapore, or Sydney. They left for a reason. Let Bali be Bali. This is a loft picture. People are, pretending to work. This is a rice field because it's my personal philosophy in life. I've thought this since I was a child. If you're going to have a co-working space in Bali and be self-respecting, you should have a rice field out back. It's as simple as that. This is an event. We have 440 events last year. We're event crazy. The reason why is, as I said, we have, let's say, 100 new people joining every month, which is a lot, which is a big number. But that means we've more or less got 100 people leaving every month, right? We don't have infinite space. So it's this kind of constant churn. And if you've ever been to a co-working space, part of the offer of a co-working space is they're community spaces, right? So the very big question we had to answer at the beginning was, how do you create a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of shared identity in a space where people are coming in and out so often? Part of it is the identity of those people, I'm going to touch on just after this, but part of it is then the way that we created opportunities for people to engage. So if you are into community building, for me, events are where my heart is. So we have about around 1.5 events per day. Some of them are big like this. We run kind of global events, startup weekend, fuck-up nights, Pecha different things like that. Great events if you know them, and everything down to members' lunches and simple stuff. This is what it looks like when we're trying to be all designy and sexy. This is what it looks like when we're trying to be nasty and scary. And this is what it looks like when we're just feeling lazy. We're right next door to the sacred monkey forest, so more often than we care to admit, we get these guys coming in and hanging out. But really, it's this kind of eclectic community of dreamers and doers from around the world who, I guess, share the commonality of taking the risk of leaving conventional life behind. So this idea of digital nomads, many of you, I'm sure, have heard the term, and I've never got a good definition of it. People say a digital nomad is somebody that can work, that has a computer and can work from everywhere, which honestly is a really useless definition because probably most people in this room, most knowledge workers anywhere, if they have a computer, they can work from anywhere. Their company culture, their own preferences might not allow it, but most people can. I would say the difference is a digital nomad is somebody who can work from anywhere and does. And so it's a certain kind of characteristic that leads people down that path. So new nomad, digital nomad, nomad with a K, location-independent professional, global citizen, Texpat is the worst one I've ever heard. I've heard a lot of bad ones. I don't really love any of the terminology. I think probably global citizen or new nomad or something like that is right. So here are 6 main characteristics that we see out of these thousands when I kind of say what's the commonality between them, what ties them together. One is this idea of passion and purpose versus survival and obligation. So what I mean by that is, and I'll talk a little bit about this, but it's actually what drives and motivates people. So survival and obligation is really probably what our parents' generation were driven by mostly. I have to work so that I can earn money, so that I can pay the bills, so that I can put food on the table, I can give my kids the best educational opportunities that I possibly can, etc. This generation, I mean, we can call them millennials, although there's now some that are a bit younger. Millennials are something like 22 to 37 years old as a generational group. I'm 41, but I'm very kind of immature, so I relate well to the millennial groupings. So this idea of being motivated by passion and purpose in terms of choosing how you spend your time is actually a really big deal for millennials, and that's very confusing for big companies, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that after. 2 is, almost by definition, they're risk takers. So most of them have left probably a stable path, a conventional thing that their friends and families can understand, and they are doing something different in a far-off place. So almost by definition, they're risk takers. Experiences over possessions. Again, this is around priorities. This is a little bit of the sharing economy logic, that people they're accumulating less things and instead deciding to spend that money on experiences rather than items. 4 is lifestyle design. If any of you have read Tim Ferriss, this is probably a term you're familiar with. It's the idea of being really intentional about what it is in your life that motivates you and gets you excited, and then designing your life around it. 5 is they're inspired by movement, which is, I suppose, rather obvious. And 6, this idea of being versus doing. So we are doers. We kind of are pre-programmed to be busy, do. And you get up in the morning and you put your clothes on, or you shower, you put your clothes on, have your breakfast, get out, go to the office, do stuff, come back, pick up the kids, do your laundry, go to bed. Again. Even when people take holidays, people often take really crappy holidays, and they go out there and they maybe do nothing for like 3 or 4 days, but that's it. I mean, their whole life is just this kind of endless endless stream of doing things. People rarely take the time out to just be, so to just sit with yourself, to just, we know the best ideas. Creativity happens in those quiet moments, but we very, very rarely give ourselves a chance to experience those. So these people tend to. I mean, they're in Bali, they're there for a reason, and often it's to give themselves a bit of spaciousness. And I guess a lot of them are coming from a kind of background. I mean, so I was giving a talk recently in London, and companies were trying to figure out, well, if these people, all these Londoners, for example, are leaving, why are they leaving? Kind of what does it? The truth is, I don't think they're the crazy ones. In some ways, I think they're kind of the sane ones. Work in general these days is kind of messed up. You do a lot of work, so most people will not do anything more than work other than sleep as adults in your life. Like, really, this is kind of how you spend your time, to the exclusion of so many other things. This is probably a dodgy statistic. Obviously, maybe you guys don't have a bad commute in Riga, so nobody keeps good stats. I don't know if this sounds right, half an hour each way. I found it from some dodgy internet source. But basically, people spend a lot of time getting to work, almost no matter what city you live in. I'm in London now for the last 4 months, and it's the worst city in Europe, and it's the only European city on the top 10 of like crappiest places to be a commuter. Working too much causes a lot of stress. Last presenter talked about that kind of low-level stress that comes and never goes away. And the more you do of it, the more it costs you in your personal life. In Japan, people die of it, and I'm sure it's not only in Japan, but I guess it happens so frequently that they actually have a word for it, karoshi, and they estimate that there are 10,000 cases a year of people literally dropping dead from overwork. So to reiterate, you do a lot of it. You spend a lot of time getting there. It causes you a lot of personal consequences, and it's potentially fatal. And most of you hate what you do. Statistically, most of you, maybe hate is a strong word, most of you, and maybe not you, I've heard today, we're all awesome, I think we're the special ones. So I guess like they out there, most of them hate their jobs, or really don't like their jobs, or really don't feel connected or a sense of excitement or purpose about the thing that they spend so much of their time doing. In London, I don't know if this is the case, but in the UK, it's one of the lonelier cities around. But there's a lot of talk around mental health, around employee well-being, and we've talked a lot today about the kind of risks around feelings of disconnection and alienation. Maybe that's related to tech, maybe not. But workers are kind of unhappy and lonely. So it's a great question. What is my point? My point is this. I have a few points, I guess. So I've been sitting in Bali for the last 9 years. I've been running HUBUD for the last 6 years. And I've had this, in some ways, really privileged position to sit in one spot while this whole kind of thing passes me by. And people come in and out. People stay for 6 months, they leave, and they go back to Riga, and then they come back 4 months later. And there's this whole journey that people are on that I'm beginning to appreciate with a bit of distance. And 4 things really kind of pop out at me as a result. One is where you work matters. So I'm a co-working advocate. I have a co-working space. I'm not really selling my co-working space because it's very unlikely that any of you are going to go there for any length of time. So don't take it at that. But I am an absolute evangelist for co-working spaces. I also run the biggest co-working conference in Asia. I am so passionate about what it can do to transform definitely the way people work, but the way people live, the way people connect as humans, the way people feel about themselves. The real magic of co-working spaces, beyond cheap rents and maybe getting funding for your tech startup, is that for the first time in human history, you can actually choose who you spend your time with in a professional setting. So you get to choose not just based on who's paying the bills or the job function you do, but you actually get to choose kind of who your tribe is and who you want to spend those 90,000 hours with. And I think that is an amazing gift that we get to enjoy today. If you've not heard of co-working, it's a shared collaborative office space. I'm sure they're all around. Look it up. It's one of the fastest growing industries on earth. The second point is, when I joined the Green School 9 years ago with my kids, I know one of the educational architects there said, the role of a school is not to teach kids stuff. The role of a school is to inspire them to become lifelong learners. And I really have seen this in such a clear way at HUBUD, because basically, as people go through their life, they're not going to have the same job that they had 3 or 4 years ago. Most people are probably not working in a field that's directly related to what they studied in school, right? The average person nowadays will change jobs every 2 to 3 years. So that's 15 to 20 times in your lifetime. And you literally have to constantly be retooling, reassessing, relearning, or you get left behind. The third thing was my mom was wrong. And I say that bravely. I hope this isn't being live streamed. But my mom was wrong. She convinced me that this is what life was meant to be like, and this is what I would find. That I would go to school, that I would study hard, that I would go to university, that I would study hard so that I could get out, so that I could get a good job at probably the age of 22, 23. Then I would work, because that's what you do. And then when I was in Canada, on average, 66 years old, I would retire, and then I would get to enjoy the good life. I'd probably get to be a better grandparent than I was a parent, because I was too busy and stressed out and unfocused. But this, she said, is the way it goes. I left university before finishing. I eventually went back, but she was in such a panic about the disaster I was going to bring in my life, because she's like, if you don't do this, you'll never go back, and you'll be miserable for the rest of it. The truth is, what I'm seeing is that these things are just smashing together in an almost unrecognizable way. So we talk about work-life balance. I think work-life balance is bullshit. I think you should try to find work that doesn't feel so much like work, and I don't say that in a really cheesy or trite way. I think whether you want it to or not, work bleeds into life, and life bleeds into work till the point where they're kind of all the same. You're not going to learn and then finish that and then work for the next 40 years. You've got to be learning all the way through. The work life for most people does not stop at 5 o'clock. It often continues into the night. But the good news is you know, it can go the other way too, and you can take days off, and things are just more fluid. And I mean, this always kind of weirded me out. I don't know if you've seen this with Airbnb, but it's a little bit of this. They split this into, like, there's Airbnb and there's Airbnb for business. And they present it as if it's very different things. I use Airbnb all the time, but I mean, for me, it's always work and it's always play. I mean, I'm here in Riga, I'm working, but definitely when the Pelmeni truck pulls up, I'll be playing. This is a friend of mine that said this, and this kind of comes back, and this is the final point, comes back to this idea of motivation. You know, Maslow's hierarchy, you probably learned this in school. You know, you have this hierarchy of needs, and at the beginning you need to eat first and not die, and then you need protection from the cold, and you know, you get this up until you get to this bottom, this self-actualization. It's like we reach our higher self. I really think people have inverted this entirely. And maybe it's because generationally people are not as hungry as they used to be. But I'll say this as if it's a total fact. Millennials are the first generation in history to feel entitled to feel work they feel passionately about. It's a great thing, inspires lots of kind of wonder. It's also a really challenging thing in a lot of ways, because people have this like existential angst all the time. It's partly why people change jobs every 2 to 3 years. They get in it and they're like, you know, am I passionate about this? I don't know. Maybe I'll do something else. And there's this kind of, you know, there's a shadow side to it as well. But this was, the guy who said this quote was a big HR recruiter, and he said that it's killing companies because they don't know how to keep people. They give them money, they give them benefits, they give them entitlements, and they're still leaving. And what they don't get is, yeah, money's important, and money will get them in the door. Money will not keep them there. So finally, this idea of like freedom. Here we are at the Digital Freedom Festival. We all want freedom. We all want to be more free. Freedom, 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 freedom. I've spoken at 4 events this year that have the word freedom in them. I kind of think for the last 5 years, I almost sell freedom. I sell a dream of freedom in Bali, right? Come to Bali, put the toes in the sand with a laptop. It's like an obligatory photo where it's like on Instagram. Look, I got my sandy feet. I can't find any goddamn power, but you never put that on Instagram. We have this obsession with freedom. And even companies, they say, well, let's give people a little bit more freedom by giving them a work-from-home entitlement, or you know, letting them, I don't know, have freedom in some way. And so we've all become obsessed with this word. But ultimately, I think it's a bit of a red herring. I don't think freedom is actually the important element in this. Ultimately, I think it's purpose. If people don't feel a sense of purpose in what they're doing, they are in that 80% at some point. It's as simple as that. If they don't feel a sense of mission, if they don't feel a sense of like magic to wake up in the morning for, if there's not a team depending on them, if there's not something they feel proud about. And the thing is, I mean, for me, what I've had this really weird experience. I told you I'm in Life 3. This is Steve 3.0. So I've been in London, and I've been consulting for this giant real estate corporation. I mean, it's huge. And when I got there, I was kind of a smartass, and somebody said, "Oh, I heard you're doing something in Bali. What were you doing in Bali?" I said, "Well, actually, I kind of help people to escape from jobs like this." And it didn't go well. They weren't funny. So I've toned that down, but I've actually, some of the work I've been doing with them, I feel as passionately about that, actually, as I did about some of the stuff I did with the UN, that on the surface seems much more passion-inspiring. So it's not about necessarily what it is, it's about what motivates you, but if you don't have purpose, you're lost. And so I guess my takeaway from the last years in Bali and the work that I still do there is find out what that is, and if you're not in it, get to it. If you're an employer, understand that. You can't motivate people with money indefinitely. If they don't feel a sense of purpose, they will be demotivated, and they will probably leave, or even worse, they'll stay. So with that, thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. And you deserve also a fortune cookie for your speech.
I've been sitting in that chair all day.
Waiting this moment all the time. But unfortunately, we won't have time for any questions and answers.
All right.
But as we know that our speakers are very friendly and they will be here for some time, then feel free to ask them questions afterwards.
One question. What does the fortune cookie say? Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known.
Awesome. Thank you.